everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to the third session of the Jurisprudence Discussion Group this term. In this session, we're pleased to have Professor Rodriguez-Blanco with us to present on her paper, Taking Akrasia Seriously. I don't think she needs much by way of introduction, but I have to give one anyway. She's the inaugural chair of Moral and Political Philosophy in the University of Surrey School of Law, and she has been instrumental, if not the instrumental figure, in making the School of Law at Surrey the institution that it is today. Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Renton, for this generosity, and it's a pleasure for me to be here at the Oxford Jurisprudence Discussion Group. And thank you very much to the organizers for suggesting, for inviting me to come. So the title of the paper is Taking Akrasia Seriously. So the paper draws from material of my manuscript, The Grammar of Responsibility for Negligence in Law and Ethics, Aspiration Perspective in Civic Maturity. I have tried to make the ideas clear and intelligible independently from the debate in prior chapters of the monograph. I have also summarized key ideas developed in the book that shed light on the explanation of Akrasia, and indeed, I intend to clarify these ideas further during the discussion. So in this paper, I argue that Akrasia provides the underpinning structural features that explains ethical blameworthiness and judgments of responsibility for negligent acts. It will be argued that we act inadvertently because we act acratically, which is explained in terms of a specific defective engagement of practical reasoning by the performing agent, namely a failure of integration between character and thinking that should be understood as a failure to inhabit the deliberative aspirational perspective. The concept of Akrasia might not seem very helpful, as this notion is plagued with multiple interpretations and ambivalences. Moreover, in addition to the complexity of interpreting Socratic and Aristotelian technical notions, contemporary and ancient understanding of Akrasia differ because the ancient understanding of practical reason and deliberation differs from contemporary understandings. Consequently, Akrasia appears to be an elusive and inescrutable phenomenon. Gideon Rosen's skepticism about responsibility for negligent actions advances the view that there cannot be responsibility for negligence unless we show that we have failed to discharge our procedural epistemic duties. This can lead, however, to an infinite regress. In order to stop the regress, we need to identify an intentional action that shows the failure of discharging our epistemic duties. In this way, negligence either collapses into intentional action or leads to infinite regress. Alternatively, Rosen tells us we could show that the negligent act is acratic as the agent considers A to be better choice than B, but nevertheless performs B. Rosen's criticism targets clear-eyed akrasia, and it states that it cannot be a potential solution to stop the infinite regress for responsibility for inadvertent acts. If we are aware or have a clear eye on the wrongness of the act, and in spite of this perform the action, then arguably the action is either reckless or intentional. Furthermore, he also believes that akrasia is a cryptic and obscure concept and therefore cannot illuminate our judgments of responsibility and negligence. Contra Rosen, we will show that our interpretation of acting acratically explains how we can act inadvertently and still be ethically and legally blameworthy and responsible. In the first section, I distinguish the modern conception of akrasia from the view advocated by Socrates and Aristotle and discuss how some contemporary models for acting acratically are either deflationary or change the subject. Additionally, advance the view that the Aristotelian practical syllogism is problematic as an explanation of how we act acratically. We think about the diachronic structure of practical agency when we focus on how deliberation operates. By contrast, practical syllogisms are used as practical arguments once the action has been performed, but cannot explain how deliberation actually operates. Practical syllogisms provide a structure of the practical argument of the agent when justifications are at stake or the action is seen as a matter of reconstruction by the agent or an observer. However, practical syllogisms do not represent what happens to the agent when she engages in acting acratically. To put the point differently, it is short of a true and powerful explanation and ignores the dynamic and complex aspects of deliberation. There is something dubiously artificial and schematic about it. Arguably, to fully grasp the deliberative process and the exercise of practical reason of the agent, we need to understand the diachronic structure of the first person perspective. This is at the core of a sound explanation of acting acratically. In the second section, I'll show the way we can fail to integrate thinking and desire and how we can inhabit the deliberative aspirational perspective. This is the core of a sound explanation of acting acratically, which shows underpinning a structure of acting negligently. The paper or the chapter establishes the foundations for the discussion of responsibility for negligent action, deliberation, and diachronic agency that are further developed in the monograph. Socrates and Aristotle on Akrasia. In Plato's Protagoras, Socrates denied the feasibility or stability of the Acratic position and says that Akrasia is not possible and it leads to a contradiction. In Protagoras, the Acratic position is the so-called the majority view. According to Protagoras, the position of the majority is that when an agent acts, her deliberation and rational decision, her knowledge of the good, has been overcome by something stronger, which is pleasure or the pleasant. Imagine the following example of a driver at a party who knows that drinking a large glass of wine will raise her blood alcohol level above the legal limit. In spite of this knowledge, she decides to have a glass of wine and after that, a second glass. She becomes tipsy and on the way home collides with another vehicle, causing injury to herself and the other driver. What is the sound account of her practical reasoning? The majority view in Protagoras will assert that her knowledge was overcome by pleasure. This means she knew what she would do, but knowledge submitted to pressure. For Socrates, this position is incoherent. For Socrates, knowledge can never be overcome by what is pleasant or less good, and therefore this is an absurd or ridiculous position. The driver could not avoid, Socrates would say, the temptation to drink. The driver could avoid, Socrates would say, the temptation to drink a glass of wine if she had knowledge, the specific knowledge of the art of measurement, namely of knowing how to weigh or commensurate what is pleasant and good with what is painful and evil. Instead of following appearances, her knowledge would allow her to act to say, to see that getting drunk, colliding with another vehicle, and injuring herself and another driver is more painful than avoiding an alcoholic beverage. This knowledge is for Socrates the art of measurement, which, like any skill, can be taught. For Socrates, the majority view ends up with the following absurd assertion: knowledge of what is good was overcome what is less good. Or if you adhere to hedonism, knowledge of what is pleasant was overcome by what is less pleasant. The Socratic position sheds light on Gary Watson's demarcation between compulsion and akrasia. For Watson, we cannot clearly distinguish between akrasia and compulsion. If our desires are sufficiently strong and can bend our judgments, then there was nothing we could have done, and it is compulsive act. Watson raises the question of whether we can be responsible for compulsive acts if they are characterized in this way, and his response is negative. Socrates would embrace Watson's potentially skeptical conclusion, namely that we cannot truly distinguish between akrasia and compulsion, and we could infer that as Socrates denies akrasia, he would arguably have no problem saying that akrasia is just compulsion. If indeed akrasia is the underpinning phenomenon in negligent acts and akrasia cannot be distinguished from compulsion, then negligence cannot be distinguished from compulsion. Judgments of responsibility for compulsion and negligence refer to the same phenomenon and arguably are not appropriate as the agent has no knowledge on what is happening. Desire or passion in a pathological sense take over the thinking and knowledge, and the latter is dragged as a slave by passion and desire. What is required for the offender is treatment instead of judgments of responsibility. Alternatively, we could say that the driver acted ignorantly and she is responsible for not learning what everyone else can learn through the teachings of the art of measurement. If we follow Socrates, we would say that the driver did not truly possess the art of measurement, as she let herself be driven by appearances. For example, the immediate pleasure of drinking a second glass of wine. But is it true that we can all learn the art of measurement? Is it true that to truly understand what is good, pleasant, and right, we simply need the art of measurement? In previous work, I defended a view of deliberation and practical reason that is far from the art of measurement. Furthermore, I resisted the view that we can learn to become good by mere teaching or by simply balancing reasons, values, or desires. I advance the view that in contemporary philosophy, there is a persistent conception that scrutinizes action, decision making processes, and deliberation in terms of a bifurcation of beliefs and desires, presupposing that they neither interact nor merge. In this way, the analysis of reasons for actions and motivation in action theory and theories of rationality generates a narrow artificial bifurcation of desires and beliefs, or motives and reason, or internal and external reasons. I also argue that as a corollary of this narrow conception, we have a theory of deliberation that assumes that when we act, we have clarity on our beliefs and or desires, or at least that they are given to us, and that our only task is to balance and select which desire we will pursue and how our beliefs will match these desires. In some cases, theories present reasons for actions as normative or external to us and tell us that our task is to try to understand these normative or external reasons. This line of research focuses on the way we engage with reasons for actions. This bifurcation thesis is therefore equally present among internalists and externalists, theories of reason for action, among motives based and reason based theories of rationality, among intellectualist theories of rationality a la Socrates, and among decision making theories that aim to reduce practical reason to an exercise of probability. A corollary of the bifurcation thesis was analyzed, the balancing model of deliberation. In all versions of the balancing model of deliberation, values, desires, and beliefs are presented to us. They are given. There's no conversion, change, or transformation that the agent needs to engage with. In an attempt to undermine this conception and offer an alternative picture of practical reason and deliberation, I have tried to define an idea of agency in which deliberation operates at the substandard or immersed level where we need to settle the question, what shall I do? This entails engaging with and understanding the values involved in the particularity of our actions. But I have also argued that we inhabit a deliberative aspirational perspective through thinking, imagination, and the recognition of deliberative aspirational perspective. In this model of deliberation that I have called the upward journey towards the determination of the what, the agent starts from an indeterminate point or end and transforms herself via grasping the values and ends, and therefore her desires and character are also transformed. Desires and beliefs interact constantly and are continually revised and transformed. The idea of balancing, namely comparing desires or beliefs, is misleading as it relies on the illusion of desires and beliefs as being given, namely representing a normative reality that needs to be grasped or an internal state that pushes us to act. By contrast, what we actually do is both take and change perspectives, taking into account what we have learned in previous deliberations and aiming to occupy a deliberative aspirational perspective that has also absorbed the substandard or immersed perspective of deliberation. I try to demonstrate that desires and emotions are a key part of both immersed or narrow deliberation and the deliberative aspirational perspective. I argue that in narrow or immersed deliberation, we are uncertain about the what, and therefore we need to bring it closer to us and our actions through the how. I also explained that through our thinking, there is a transformation of our desires, and specifically our desires for the what, and that the modified what also has a transformative effect on our desires. In addition, I show that our desires are transformed by our experiences and thinking on a subject matter, and that this material can be part of our subsequent deliberation. Experience and thinking undergo changes as we inhabit a different perspective, including the deliberative aspirational perspective. I should also mention that in this model, like in the Aristotelian account, pleasure is internal to our conception of living well, and this is a crucial feature of akrasia. Immersed deliberation is in continuity with medium and long term ends and goals, and experiences of pleasure are shaped by our thoughts and conceptions of ends and goals. Note that so far we have argued the good, the pleasant, and so on as ends can only be realized through thoughts, and our thoughts on the pleasant will shape the way we realize our ends. According to the Aristotelian inspired model that I have defended, the purely thinking or cognitive skills a la Socrates is not sufficient to combat the strength of desires. The latter need to be transformed. What happens before an action is crucial to what happens later at the moment of performing the action. McIntyre rightly observes, quote, "Here is a scary thought. What determined the final stage of my reasoning may have not have been occurred immediately beforehand." End of this quote. When we engage with judgments of responsibility and blameworthiness in negligence, we need to consider the diachronicity of the deliberation and the subsequent action. But prior to advancing a defense of akrasia as the underpinning phenomenon of ethical and legal negligence, I will both expand on the Socratic position and scrutinize some interpretations of the Aristotelian position on akrasia. This analysis will enable us to better grasp the idea that the Aristotelian view is the refinement of the Socratic position and not a rejection. I will also show that the modern view of akrasia deflates the phenomenon and impoverishes our understanding of deliberation and learning to become good. Let us go back to the majority view in Plato's Protagoras. If knowledge can randomly be overtaken by desires, passions, and emotions, then we are most likely not motivated to better understand our actions, or even worse, the idea of becoming good is unintelligible to us. In this case, contra Socrates, knowledge cannot save us. According to this picture, not only do desires and emotions dominate us, but it is also uncertain when they will appear in our deliberations or actions. Note that akrasia occurs when we cannot restrain our desires and passions and fail to integrate them with our reasoning. It is not the case that we can never be overcome by passions. If passions are so strong that they would overcome or bypass the reasoning of anyone, then we are clearly in the domain of compulsion. The Acratic is not a woman who fails to be heroic, but rather her failure is weakness. In this model, perspective and its key role in our transformational process is lost. Let us go back to our example of Beatrice, which was discussed in a previous chapter of the monograph. Beatrice is deliberating about whether or not to register her daughter in gymnastics and ballet, and she knows that this action should be pursued in order to achieve her daughter's physical health and promote harmony of body and soul. After deliberation, Beatrice decides to register her daughter in gymnastics, and to pay for the registration, she transfers the money from her saving account into her current account. However, prior to making the payment, she starts to look at beautiful coats on a popular website. She visualizes herself with a beautiful and expensive coat and buys it using the money that has been reserved for her daughter's gym ballet fees. The majority view in Protagoras will tell us that this is a common pattern. It happens to Beatrice, to you, to myself, and to everyone. There's nothing mysterious. We are subjects to our passions and desires. Furthermore, there's nothing we can do, or worse, we might even conclude that we cannot become better, our position cannot be improved. Nevertheless, we know that some people can avoid temptation. How is this possible? The majority view will probably say that the strength of desires in each particular individual is the key factor. The majority view, however, does not present a coherent picture of our aspirational transformation, or is skeptical about this possibility, as desires and passions can always dominate us. Socrates' solution relies on three key elements. First, the art of measurement can save our lives, and no doubt Beatrice's life too. Beatrice should learn the skill of measuring pleasure, weighing pleasure, the short term pleasure of her luxurious coat, and the long term pleasure of seeing her daughter flourishing physically and mentally, and the skill of weighing pain, namely the short-term pain of not having a new coat and the long-term pain of her daughter's laziness and lack of physical health. This knowledge possesses a strength and will enable her to master her desires and emotions. Furthermore, anomalies in her deliberation and performance would reflect lack of knowledge, and akrasia is nothing but a symptom of a lack of unity of the self. True, the Socratic explanation focuses on knowledge, skill, and the art of measurement. But it also has a second key element, which is an emphasis on diachronicity. Evaluation of a performance occurs not only just when an intention is formed and deliberated upon. We need to resist reading the action as a mental event, intention, belief, desire, which precedes and causes the bodily movement. The latter are effects, and within this model are conceived as something that happen in the world independently of our mental events. Once I start to perform an action, it is only a matter of effects and results. Second, the diachronic understanding of action present in Socrates focuses on the thinking and deliberative exercise of weighing prior to execution of the action. But the act of thinking projects itself beyond the mere world of effects, in fact, and beyond the particular result with its respective appearance. It invites us to consider our actions and results beyond the present moment of execution. Beatrice is invited to consider and balance her different beliefs and desires and achieve an answer to the question, what shall I do in light of my knowledge of pleasure and pain? This is why, arguably, Socrates rejects akrasia, because akrasia conceives the action only in its synchronic dimension. Acratic action is located in a particular time and is confined to the facts and appearances that randomly strike the agent. Knowledge, as the art of measurement, is essentially diachronic. Thus, knowledge neutralizes passions, and as a result, the agent gains her rational structure in acting. A third key element is that for Socrates, the problem is not on the thing to obtain or action, but on the perspective of the agent. A correct perspective is a stance towards truth that empowers the agent to destroy appearances. Furthermore, for the agent who possesses moral knowledge, a strong irrational pleasure and desires do not compel belief. For Socrates, it is key that the agent can recognize their own attitude towards knowledge. Aristotle agrees with Socrates that desires and emotions cannot bear knowledge. However, Aristotle believes that akrasia is not an absurd and incoherent phenomenon. He proposes a refinement of the Socratic proposal where knowledge is not sufficient and consideration of character and development are key. Aristotle's explanation is complex and focuses on three different kinds of character, namely the self indulgent, the akolastons, the weak, the akratic, and the self control, the encratic. The akolastos, or self indulgent, engages with vicious act and has developed a character that pursues excess in pleasure. They are self indulgent as a matter of principle rather than being weak. Their conception of what is pleasant is mistaken. For example, the person who overeats. The akolastos does not understand the good of each activity and concentrates on their own pleasures. In contrast to the akrates, whose moral choices and deliberations are sound, the akolastos does not preserve their moral knowledge. The Socratic individual deliberates correctly and reaches a rational choice, but performs actions against their own deliberations and rational choice. And finally, the Socratic individual deliberates correctly and achieves a rational choice when trying to settle an answer to the question, what shall I do? Although they are attracted by vicious and less good or pleasant choices, they are able to resist them. Correct understanding of the process of practical reasoning of the encratic is key, and it shows that the knowledge that shields from error and saves our lives is neither theoretical or epistemic knowledge, nor ethical strength, but reflects thinking about the subject matter, the transformation of desires and emotion, and an attempt to inhabit the deliberative aspirational perspective. These types of characters should be understood as ideal types, but there are nuances and borderline cases, and there is plenty of room for impurity and mixed cases. In addition to these three types of character is the woman and man of virtue, the phronimos. She is or he, A, engages in an action with the knowledge of what and how they are doing what they're doing. B, does the action for its own sake. And C, has a stable character. Arguably, only the phronimos has a stable character, and the actions of the less than phronimos type probably oscillates between the self-indulgent, the acratic, and encratic. The key issue is that for Aristotle, there is a development or process of learning to become good in both the acratic and encratic. However, within our Aristotelian inspired model of deliberation, this process does not depend on knowledge of the art of measurement, as Socrates proposes. It depends on our thinking about the subject matter, our character development, and the transformation of our desires as they will determine our seeing and perspectives of what is good, pleasant, right, evil, or vicious. To put the point in a different way, the knowledge that shields us from acting in error is not only the kind of knowledge that is obtained through thinking, namely the deliberation and rational choice, but is the alignment of our non rational part, namely desires and emotions, with deliberation and rational choice. We need to explain how emotions and desires develop and interact with our deliberation and rational choice, and how they are able to integrate in our rational choice. The Aristotelian insight also invites us to recognize that there is agency in transition towards the virtuous agent or phronimos type of character. Thus, understanding of the encratic is key in this explanation. So, it should be said that all interpretations of the way that practical syllogism explains the Akrasia have been challenged. Furthermore, if practical syllogism explains the loss of understanding as the loss of the particular premise due to desire, it is unclear how we can distinguish between compulsion and Akrasia. Austin challenges Aristotle with confusing loss of control and succumbing to temptation. The latter characterizes the acratic. Let us also remind ourselves that Watson has similarly argued that if desires undermine practical reasoning due to the force of desire, then the distinction between akrasia and compulsion is unclear. Compulsion is more physiological, and the desire represented as something that just happens to us is passive. The idea that the acratic loses the knowledge The knowledge of the particular premise due to her desires does not shed light on the distinction between the compulsive and acratic agent and why the latter is within the domain of responsible agency. Aristotle's distinction between use and knowledge might shed light on how akrasia operates. Amelie Rorty, for example, asserts that the distinction between active knowledge and unused knowledge reflects the position of the acratic. The acratic finds herself in a situation where she cannot use her knowledge. These, however, are simple redescriptions of the phenomena without any further explanation. They constitute the primary material which enable us to fully explain akrasia. But we also need to use Aristotle's conception of deliberation and practical reason to fully illuminate akrasia. Arguably, the potentiality actuality distinction does not help us much to illuminate the phenomenon and tends to obscure the development of desires and emotions and the way deliberation operates. If the critic has knowledge of what she should do in particular circumstance, but does not use it, then it means she has not deliberated correctly. Also, I will try to argue. In other words, when we can say that she has potential knowledge of what she should do, but not actual knowledge as she does not use it, this means that she has not truly brought the how closer to the what. If we go back to our example of Beatrice, which we would say, in light of the knowledge use distinction, that after deliberating on the physical health of her daughter, Beatrice should register her daughter in gymnastic lessons. If she has deliberated correctly, she would have brought the how closer to the what and would have transformed her initial desire of physical health of her daughter to a closer specification, namely not harmony of body and soul. How are we doing?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, good. Yes, I'm going to skip the contemporary aspect. I think we could discuss, some of you might have read the paper, so we could perhaps discuss Davidson's position. So I go directly to the integration problem. In the contemporary account of akrasia, the control part of the action happens in the formation of intention or deliberation. Contemporary scholars overlook the diachronicity of action, the temporality of deliberation, and the progress of the action. This diachronicity is the key to recognizing that the agent in his deliberation is trying to give an answer to the question, what shall I do? She undergoes transformation and is a learner. Some of these transformations are uneven and defective, but some are successful, and she's able to inhabit the deliberative aspirational perspective. But while she's learning, her error is not here, not there, but rather in the entire process. Contemporary conceptions of negligence, both in law and ethics, mirror this conception of agency, where everything happens at a specific locus or at a specific time. What the agent controls happens before the performance. We say, you ought to have known, you ought to have foreseen it, and it is assumed that there was a specific moment in time at which the agent should have or could have identified the error in the performance. This question of how knowledge of the acratic has come to be absent invites us to look for a specific locus or time when the error is identifiable or isolated. When Aristotle tells us that akrasia is more like Empedocles' speech where we can utter words without full understanding, or drunkard, or someone falling asleep, we fall into the intellectual temptation of looking for the specific locus or psychological event when this state was formed, and we trace the initial choice that caused this state. Other interpreters of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics ask whether akrasia is more like relaxing one's grip on a golf club when told not to do so. Listening to this metaphor, we are tempted to look for the mechanism that caused the loss of grip. Other candidate interpretations present akrasia as a locus of error, for example, lack of awareness or attention. But I argue that there is no mechanism, locus, or specific psychological event whose absence or presence explains akrasia. I argue that what explains akrasia is a process of learning through deliberation experiences, thinking about the subject matter and inhabitant perspective. There is the underpinning phenomenon of negligence or inadvertence in action. Lack of awareness and or attention or awareness and attention are symptoms of either failure or excellence of this process respectively. Furthermore, the Akratic act and therefore the negligent act manifests conflict, which is revealed through regret. Namely, the Akratis regret what she has done and feels shame precisely because her ethical development is uneven and her errors in action and performance make her aware of it. The question that arises is why the Akratic agent failed to act despite having knowledge that was accessible to her. So far, we have said that access to this knowledge is through deliberation and inhabited a deliberative, aspirational perspective. In chapter 9 of the monographs, I focus on how this knowledge, in the context of the law of negligence, is accessible to the agent who performs a negligent or inadvertent action. Contemporary conceptions of Akrasia dissolve the Socratic question, namely whether thinking can determine good or right action and the role of desire and perspective. The question of good or right connected to action is dissolved, and only the flationary conceptions focusing on the epistemic condition are emphasized. The problem of knowledge and ignorance in the practical realm, including practical reason as constituted by deliberation, involves a question about the perspectives that are present. Perspectives taken by the agent engaging in first person deliberation are multiple and, as we demonstrated in previous work, include a deliberative aspirational perspective. In addition, the process of deliberation and inhabiting perspectives involves and transforms the entire self, namely not only cognitive abilities but also desires and emotions. Consequently, the question of a strength or weakness of desire cannot be asked in isolation of the question of engagement with deliberation and inhabiting perspectives. So, in the paper, I discussed Davidson, which is due to time, there's no time here to explain it. But I said what Donald Davidson ignores, which is emphasized by McIntyre in the nature of is our nature of a struggle. The fact that both judgments occur within a period of time. My model and the voluntarist model focus on revision and the struggle of becoming, including the transformational process to inhabit a deliberative aspirational perspective. However, I reject the voluntarist view this, that this task is done by the will, and I focus on perspectives and how our perspectives change through knowledge and its interaction with our desires and passions. Our account does not embrace the view that there is a gap between deliberation and execution, as deliberation is already involved in execution via transforming desires and emotions. If the agent engages in sound deliberation at both levels, immersed deliberation and inhabiting the deliberative aspirational perspective, sound performance is in continuity with thought and right desires and emotions. It is, however, a constant process of self-transformation towards inhabiting the deliberative aspiration perspective of the particular action. By contrast, the view that Akrasia is a matter of the struggle of the will or a matter of a lack of knowledge within an Aristotelian understanding of practical syllogism, with subtle distinctions between using knowledge and having knowledge, a lack of perception or a lack of sound perception of particulars, and between knowledge of the general without the particular, or knowledge of the particular without knowledge of the general, or the failure to merge the general and the particular at the moment of judgment reflects the anxiety of identifying a unique locus or a specific psychological event that will reveal the error of the Akratic reveal where the error of the Akratic performer happens. We can say that there is the fiction or myth of a particular locus of error or a specific psychological event when we try to put forward a sound conception of our creation. This anxiety is exacerbated when we see different accounts that emphasize ways in which perception can stand still, as if we were able to observe better or how empirical conditions better or know empirical conditions better so that we can avoid intellectual error. The belief is that the correct concession of attention or awareness will consequently enable us to make a clear demarcation between akrasia and non-acratic performance of an action. I think we will leave it up here. I think the point is a bit clear now.